Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you for the next 25 minutes or so about what seems to be quite a grandiose title, which is Blockchain is About to Change Your World. No, really. Before I sort of unpack that, let me introduce myself. My name's Carlton Hopper. I'm a partner in the IBM services business. I have responsibility for the team of people who are involved in all of the work that we're doing across industries where we're leveraging blockchain and other technologies to innovation. Been around for quite a bit over the last 30 years, seen one or two shifts in technology, changing business, was there right at the heart of the dot-com revolution. And it's in that context and looking at some of the macro activity that's going on in the market today, we'd like to share with you some of the trends that we're seeing that maybe substantiate that statement. Now, for most people, we all know technology alone does not drive change. It is what people do, it is leadership, it is policy, and it's some of those macro trends that we'd like to talk about. I'm joined with Winston Yong. I don't think he was billed, so you get two for the price of one today. Winston is in my team, and I'll hand over to him straight away to maybe do a little bit of a level set on what we mean when we say blockchain, and then we'll take you through some of our perspectives. Over to you, Winston.
Thank you, Carlton. Myself, Winston Yong, I'm an executive architect in IBM. I specialize in enterprise architect, and as the chief architect for blockchain and emerging technology in Europe, my job is to ensure that all the different projects that are happening around Europe for IBM are consistently solution for blockchain. Patterns, accelerators, and quality are my aims. So today, I'm going to be bringing to you some of our patterns and learnings from the many hundreds of projects that IBM has been doing. But first of all, if we could go to the next slide, let me do a level set. What is blockchain? Well, it all happened back in 2008 when a very mysterious character called Satoshi Nakamoto decided to publish a white paper. Till today, we do not know who he is, but his white paper had a very simple logic. It said that every event in time happens sequentially when they are related events. Each event generates a set of data. What if we could put each set of data associated with the event into a block, and the next set of data associated with the next event into another block, and we chain them together cryptographically? And that became blockchain. He then subsequently in 2009 published the first application of a blockchain, which is what we have today called Bitcoin. And he used these blocks of information to chain up for what we call today in financial services payment rails. Who made what payment to whom, and the transfer of wealth. However, I'd like to point out to you two other significant events after that. One is associated with the concept of smart contract, when late in the 2010s, the concept of logic being put on top of each block was encapsulated into smart contracts. Therefore, each block can decide when it will match up with the next block when the logic is met. The other thing that happened, which is significant for blockchain, is the concept of permission ledgers. No longer do we need to say that these are public ledgers and like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency where you have to do calculations of complex algorithm in order to prove who you are, the concept of proof of work. You could say that the business network is fixed and we need to have consensus among those who started the network to allow people to join or people to fall off. Hence the birth of permission ledgers. These two characteristics of blockchain gave birth to an explosion of blockchain use cases that are outside of cryptocurrency, because it allowed the reduction of controls and checks. it simplified the processes, and importantly, there are new business models that are emerging. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Carlton, who's going to walk us through examples of how these use cases came about. Back to you, Carlton.
Thank you, Winston. Thank you. Next chart, please. So over the last couple of years, there's been an explosion of projects that have moved very rapidly from experimentation and POC into live production. We're currently engaged in, I think, something north of 103 live business networks now on blockchain in some way, shape, or form across a number of industries. And I think you need to sort of look at the patterns, how organizations and new organizations are getting real value. There's three that I would pull out without going through this chart in too much detail. The first is, as Winston says, the ability to support digitization and to take out friction in complicated supply chains. A really good example of that is the work that we're doing in TradeLens, which is the network for tracking shipping containers, where the data around that shipping container is of interest to shippers, to port authorities, to customs authorities, previously a highly manual and paper-based process, now working on a common system. And essentially, the value there is to take out cost and take out friction. However, the interesting dynamic is TradeLens is now up to 60% of all global container shipping is now operating on that platform. And that starts to open up some really interesting opportunities to be able to monetize and leverage that data in new areas. But the pattern of digitizing manual documentation, eradicating handoffs for efficiency and cost is one pattern. The next pattern, which was born in many respects out of the retail and the food supply space, is provenance. So tracking and tracing the movement of an asset and goods through a supply chain. Initially, in the case of Food Trust, looking at the likes of food recall for when there are issues with food quality or there's been some issue, but more increasingly to be able to connect consumers to understanding the provenance of goods, or to use that provenance model to think about outbound supply chain. So many of the projects are really focusing at the heart on that notion of track and trace and provenance, where the payback and value is around changing the value proposition to the end consumer, as well as anything to do with particular cost. And then the third pattern is for business models that don't exist today. If you take the energy sector and you take the focus on renewable energy sources and how you're going to balance and how the grid companies are having to understand the interplay between solar panels, even electric cars, being able to charge back to the grid, the existing technology and business process infrastructure would not allow for that interaction and exchange. So what you're finding is new entities are spinning up as new business models to build the technology and the business processes to support new ways of interacting. So the notion of reducing cost, driving provenance, and also bringing new sources of revenue and trading are three macro patterns. Next chart, please. Now, I think the interesting perspective I'd like to put forward is the typical adoption of technology goes through a standard process. People will experiment, as you see in the bottom left. They will look at point solutions. They will then get to production. We're absolutely on the tipping point where there's a material number of projects reaching real production. And that's not just live with actual trading volumes. And that then starts to create the notion of real business networks who are trading and driving real value. And we'll come on to that value in the next part of the presentation. I think over the last 10 weeks, we've seen organizations hit their targets for digitization for 2030 in 10 weeks. We are all in a uniquely uncharted territory. And there are three factors that I think are going to really turbocharge that natural direction that we're on around driving to real adoption. The first is obviously COVID, which I'm sure has been talked about significantly. And that is really putting huge pressure on the two things that drive those new business models. How do I rapidly drive out cost and inertia in my existing business? And or what are the new ways of working that I had perhaps a lower appetite 6, 12 months ago to explore that I really must interrogate now. The second is collaboration. We've experienced a huge uptick in businesses wanting to really open up and consider how they're going to work together. And instead of asking why not, they're asking why. And that sort of leadership sense of wanting to collaborate is right at the heart of how you will build a blockchain network. Whether that's working across your organizational boundaries, if you're a large corporate, or whether that's working across industry boundaries that don't typically collaborate or share information together. And then the third is leadership. And what I mean by leadership is not just individuals, it's actually the authorities as well. So many of the industry bodies and indeed public sector, perhaps 12 months ago, were looking at technologies like this and considering the risk and the control aspect of this. They're increasingly looking at how do we create the environment to let that innovation flourish. And those three factors, the economic imperative of organizations to explore new solutions, I think a mood of collaboration that I've not seen for many, many years, and the leadership coming from outside authorities and within organizations are only going to turbocharge the level of pace and adoption that's already starting to move because of these live projects that are starting to prove value. What we'd like to do with you now is share with you some data from a recent survey to give you a sense of what the clients that we've spoken to and people in the market are saying about these dynamics. So back to you, Winston.
Thank you, Carlton. And on the next slide, what we've been doing is speaking to our clients and also people who are not necessarily using IBM technology. We've interviewed over 1,000 CXOs across 22 industries globally. And the question we asked them was, how are you using the blockchain network? We found three key messages from the responses. Firstly, 41% of blockchain activities are now already today generating positive returns. And these returns have come in the form of digitized effort, process optimization, and brand uplift. 41% that are generating returns right now using emerging technology. The second point that we found was 90% of the organizations are saying that the reason why they will join a blockchain network is because of data standardization across the network. It is not enough for them that they are just making sure that the data is golden and good within their own organization. They need the data quality to be coming in from their suppliers and coming back from their customers. And 90% are saying joining a blockchain network and exchanging data according to a standard is part of the reason for getting value out of blockchain. Lastly, we asked the CTOs and CIOs, what do they think of the type of technology that is available right now? How do they see it working with the myriad of blockchain technology that is competing for attention? Their response, 85% of them have just acknowledged that they have to take action right now because it is a given that there will be multiple blockchain technology in the market. And most importantly is how do they interact? In the example that Carlton was giving earlier, how does container shipments network work with another network that provides trade finance, and that other network then provides insurance? Hence, in the coming 3 years, we will see a lot of the blockchain networks starting to talk to each other. But let me now, in the next slide, talk to you about how the different participants are joining network. And we find three categories. The first categories are network builders. Under 20% will come together, be a first mover, put in their money and try and establish a new network. for which they will then harvest their results and benefits. An example is WeTrade, when 12 competing banks decided to get together and say, we've got to do something to make our industry more efficient. Let us pool our resource, build a blockchain network for trade finance, and reap the benefits of it. However, that is only 20% of the participants who are innovative and doing something out of the box. 30%, almost a third, are second movers. Second movers are going to just join the network and make use of existing functionalities. Many of you might have heard of Food Trust, which is a collaboration between quite a few of the food processors in the industry and IBM to create a platform that can track the provenance of food. Carrefour was not one of those members who developed it with us. Instead, they chose to be a second mover, and they joined quite soon after Food Trust went live to put 2,000 of their own brand products onto blockchain. What it allows them to do is to provide a quality assurance to their customers that the food that they are buying, whether it be fresh chicken or packaged mashed potato, they would be able to track where did this food come from, which potato farm, which dairy farm, which chicken farm did it come from, and the quality is assured. Now, what is the third category? The third category, comprising half of the network participants, are network expanders, where, like Carrefour, they join the network, but it's not enough. They need to personalize it, and they take that step further. And what I'd like to do now, and many of you can see, there is a QR code on your screen right now. Alex, would you maximize the screen so that the audience would be able to scan it with your mobile phone camera and follow that link? When you follow that link, you are effectively going into a blockchain network. And that, for many of you, might be your first experience of blockchain. But it is very quick to just go through it and trace the provenance. In this case, the scenario is coffee. You're holding a packet of coffee powder that has come all the way from Colombia. The client that we have here is Farmer Connect. Farmer Connect is a European wholesaler of coffee, and they get most of their coffee from Colombia. It's a very long supply chain that goes from farmers in Colombia to processing plants to finally being shipped across to Europe and into the hands of consumers like you and I, who will then decide whether we are going to pay for the coffee or not. The realization with Farmer Connect is that European customers are very concerned about sustainability, fair trade. How do these kind of value get transported back to the farmer? There are sustainability projects that many people are running, and there are certification programs. But Farmer Connect decided that we want to connect the consumer all the way to the farmer, and we're going to use blockchain. So when you scan that code, you have the opportunity to decide how would you like part of that premium that you paid for a sustainable coffee to go to the farmer. And you get an acknowledgement from the farmer back into the blockchain, all cryptographically linked and assured that the farmer has received the funds. This is really pivoting the market on its head, because right now you have consumers that can connect directly with the suppliers and all the way back down to farmers. These are the three categories of network participants: network builders, joiners, and people who join and then expand the network. Right now, I'd like to hand back to Carlton to talk about another dynamic aspect of blockchain.
Okay, next chart, please. The final trend that I think is going to be a really interesting accelerant is in the space of digital currency. As you can see there from the survey, nearly 60% of organizations involved in using blockchain are considering how they use tokenization. So what unit of value do they create in an asset, let's say an energy token? And the ultimate instantiation of that is going to be digital currency. If you go back 2-3 years, the likes of central banks and indeed private banks were looking at such a thing as very much a research topic. It has such a potential impact on monetary policy, sovereign identity, and the like. It was probably in the too hard box. But a combination of initiatives coming outside the financial sector, the likes of Libra, that have been looking to leverage technology like blockchain to support payments, is really forcing the establishment and the public sector to embrace looking at some of these new initiatives to drive and own. And right now, it's moved out of the research back office right to the governor and to the C-suite. And there are a number of initiatives currently live globally that are looking at a number of technologies. Blockchain isn't necessarily the answer or the only answer, but it is in there as one of the potential enabling technology capabilities to fulfill the likes of a digital currency. And that has some potentially interesting effects. One, it could completely change the market infrastructure for the costs and the inertia that is in place now for the likes of cross-border payments. But perhaps even more profound, in my view, when that side of our infrastructure, if you will, corporate and trading infrastructure, look to embrace the technology, and it is quickly moving to a case of when, not if, that is going to drive a huge wave of confidence and development into the technology that will feed back into adoption in a very, very profound way. So another macro event, if you will, that I think will have a very profound impact. So next chart, please. So let me leave you with two things. The first is an equation. And I guess excusing the sort of mathematical symbols, which are long in my distant memory, but really value comes from two things. It comes from new business models and leadership. And the point here, blockchain in itself is not going to change your world. But the desire to create new business models, I think, has never been at such a high, given where we are in the market today. And that is going to require using data in very different ways outside the firewalls of our organizations. And blockchain is one of the tools, and a very powerful one, that allows that to happen in a safe and secure and trusted way. And the leadership cannot be underestimated. Change does not happen without leadership. But there are some very, very leading indicators, in my view, that are showing that leadership is coming from authorities and from within organizations to embrace this in a way that they probably weren't going to envisage 3-4 months ago. There has never been a more important time for leaders and businesses to look at those new business models, but also be a little bit more risk-taking and look at the art of the possible. And I think the environment is much more open to how organizations will need to collaborate to make these business networks work. Final thought is, what does this mean for, I guess, many of the community in this space? Well, for sure, blockchain is being used in some of the spaces around procurement and supplier management. But I think the bigger question for everybody is, in a world where you have organizations connecting their suppliers to their end customers and connecting to new business networks, one has to think, in whatever industry the sector are in, what is going to be the new business model change in my sector? And how does that profoundly change how I manage my current supply base and how I'm managing my strategic procurement decisions? Because the networks are going to change. And I think that's something that has never been more relevant, given the need for organizations to trade in some of the most unique trading conditions that I've certainly seen in the last 30 years. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully we've given you some food for thought. Would be delighted to catch up with anybody. Our details can be obtained, through the conference at Carlton Hopper. at uk.ibm.com. Please feel free to email me. And hopefully it's been a use of 30 minutes of your time, and I'll let you get back to the rest of your conference calls for the day. Thank you.
Thank you.